If you were a kid in the 90s or the early 2000s, then you likely grew up with what many consider the golden age of Sonic games. Whether it's the classics like Sonic and Knuckles, or through the transition to 3D with the Adventure era, Sega, well, they just couldn't miss as far as Sonic games go. And Sonic was on the fast track to solidifying himself as a high-speed hero. Now, that's not to suggest he hasn't done so by this point. In fact, Sonic is by far one of the most recognizable video game characters of all time. But there were certainly some games that over time became a bit more divisive. And the first one that comes to mind for me is Sonic Heroes. Now, that's not to say the previous games don't have their flaws and their critics, but the original 2003 multi-platform title has probably caused the most disagreement between fans that I'm aware of. That's because while many fans hold this game on a pedestal, considering it one of the best in the entirety of the franchise, there's also a near equal amount who deem it as not only one of the worst entries, but as the beginning of the quote-unquote dark ages of the series. And to be transparent, while I'm not the most knowledgeable on Sonic lore in general, I did grow up playing and looking forward to every upcoming Sonic title. From the Adventure series, the Game Boy exclusives like the Advanced Trilogy, and even my controversial favorite, Shadow the Hedgehog. While we're at it, I even 100% the infamous Sonic 06 as a kid. However, when it comes to Heroes, it's the only title that I own and still have not completed to this day. I mean, seriously, I couldn't remember the basics of the plot or the gameplay if I tried. So with that said, having recently played the Adventure series and Shadow the Hedgehog, I set out on one final mission, or should I say adventure, to replay and finally finish this controversial title, to get an in-depth understanding on why I never finished this game as a kid. And of course, my personal opinion on if Sonic Heroes is one of the best or one of the worst Sonic releases. Now, I'm not going to waste any of our time here, because when I first began my playthrough, I immediately caught on to why I didn't enjoy this game as a kid. In similar fashion to the adventure games, Sonic Heroes allows you to play through several different perspectives, each connecting and intertwining at various points throughout the overarching narrative, leaving us with a grand total of 12 characters and 4 quote-unquote unique storylines. Which sounds just like Adventure 2, but double, right? Not really. You see, instead of taking turns, all 3 characters on each team are playable at all times. And if that sounds crazy and hectic to you, well, it certainly can be chaotic. But it also can be a ton of fun too. Each of the 4 teams, Sonic, Dark, Rose, and Chaotix, implements a sort of teamwork aspect where the player must strategically alternate between the flight, power, and speed characters at various points in each stage, due to them having specific powers and strengths that are needed to progress. For instance, the flight characters Tails, Rouge, Charmy, and Cream will be all necessary to get over high ledges, complete small challenges like pressing 3 switches at once, and oftentimes will save your ass from falling into a never-ending pit. Because the controls, they can be slippery as hell, which I found to be a huge pain in the ass, and at times had me raging like I was 7 years old again. This was especially frequent when using the power characters, Knuckles, Omega, Big, and Vector, whom, while are by far the best to use for combat situations, are a bit unpredictable, and while performing some attacks, can easily slip off the sides of the arena if you're not careful. Lastly, everyone's favorite speed-based characters, Sonic, Shadow, Amy, and Espio, are used for a variety of purposes, like navigating stages quickly, chaining homing attacks, light dashes, and of course, wall jumps. But I actually found myself using these 4 the least out of the bunch, which is surprising because you generally expect the opposite. And speaking for myself, as a kid, this perturbed me enough to put the game down relatively early. Not because of the strategic nature necessarily, but because at the time, I played Sonic games for the Sonic stages, only pushing through the other characters' levels to get to my favorite, the speed-based stages. And don't get me wrong, while there are certainly your fair share of speed-based sections here, there wasn't quite enough for me to scratch that itch or feel completely satisfied in that regard. But while that Sonic game feel was something I felt the game lacked in my recent playthrough, Heroes still made up for that in many unique ways. Sonic Heroes gave me that old school 2000s platformer feel that I had no idea I missed so much. The sheer variety in each team's moveset, allowing you a plethora of ways to navigate through an area. Also, admittedly, having to strategize every next move so I don't make the tiniest mistake and lose everything. Well, that might sound awful, but in truth, it kept me on my toes and provided a really unexpected challenge, which honestly was refreshing. Throughout each stage in the 4 campaigns, you will come across enemies who are unlike your typical Sonic fighter, mostly because they have actual health bars. This was implemented, I believe, to give the power characters some reason to exist. But while I do get what they were going for, I just can't completely get on board with it. The speed characters feel more subpar, at least in my opinion. To combat this though, there will be newly introduced level ups found throughout every stage. Each character can go up to a max level of 3, with every level up increasing the power of their unique abilities. This in turn allows you to destroy fodder faster, fly higher, and even deal more damage to bosses. For example, level 2 Shadow will take a few hits to destroy this enemy, while a level 3 Shadow takes just 1 hit. That's what I like to see. And all in all, I quite enjoy this addition because you need to be even more strategic and cautious. If you die, you lose every single level up, but in turn that adds even more depth and strategy to this game. What unfortunately does lack depth though is the overarching narrative of Heroes as a whole. The story is pretty simple on all ends, with each team having 14 levels consisting of 7 different stages with an Act 1 and Act 2, and in similar fashion to the classic Sonic titles, ending every Act 2 with a boss stage, which I thought was really cool and an awesome callback. Where it does differ slightly is each team's goal, with Team Sonic's being to stop Eggman in 1 day, Team Dark wanting to outright kill Eggman and uncover the truth about Shadow's past, Team Rose wants to, surprise surprise, find Froggy again, and now Chocola as well. I will say though, at least they made Big enjoyable to play, finally putting some well-deserved respect on my boy. And not to forget, lastly, Team Chaotix are a group of freelance musical mercenaries who are hired by someone who's definitely not Eggman to defeat definitely not Eggman. If you know, you know. And while this bit of plot is enough to make a compelling enough story for a Sonic game, it's certainly not nearly as complex as the previous 2 games, especially Adventure 2, which I felt had a very dark and interesting concept. That being said, the devs were certainly more focused on the gameplay here as opposed to the story, which is fine, I guess. But regardless, what I still did find really odd is that each team goes through the exact same stages at the exact same time, and still only run into each other for the occasional team versus team boss battle. But what's even weirder to me is that each team will fight the exact same Eggman bosses at the exact same time, with Sonic and Rose's story legit ending with them meeting up after defeating the Egg Emperor. Was there 4 Egg Emperors at the exact same place at the exact same time? Someone please explain if so. Jokes aside, this is forgivable for a game of this nature, but I just enjoyed Sonic Adventure 1 a little bit better, where some characters will fight Chaos 2 while others will fight Chaos 4. It just felt more aligned, if that makes sense. And while the structure of these campaigns are eerily similar, still the main difference between them is undoubtedly the difficulty, with Team Rose being the easiest, and by that I mean like really freaking easy, and consisting of the shortest levels, while Team Sonic being reminiscent of an average playthrough for a Sonic game, and Team Dark being the absolute hardest, having the most frequent enemy interactions and longest stages. While each of these 3 do have the same goal of making it to the end without dying, and very similar gameplay in terms of the characters' movesets, Chaotix, however, was a breath of fresh air in that department, having a variety of unique missions like defeating all the Eggman robots in an area, or something as silly as collecting 10 hermit crabs, even going as far to switch up the gameplay by allowing Charmy to open flowers which not only give you items or a ledge to stand on to gain height, but a teleporting pad that can bring you back and forth to collect items you may have missed, and this all in turn ups the difficulty just a bit. Speaking of difficulty, the game in itself isn't necessarily too difficult to beat, but what it did do is challenge me and my patience more than any Sonic game has ever done. And by that, I mean I died constantly. This sometimes admittedly being my own fault, but more times than not being due to either one of the game's many, and I mean many, glitches. The janky controls, which are so slippery that it becomes almost essential that you use your flight character for traversal. Not to mention the bottomless pits are so common in this game, and you will oftentimes slip right off the side of a ledge due to little fault of your own. While I do love a good challenge, and I've come to embrace just a bit of jank in Sonic games, my main issue comes down to the fact that I rarely felt like any death was truly fault of my own. And at one point, this Sonic game had me raging so damn hard that I actually got an intense migraine. That is not a common thing for me to do. While this issue was present throughout 2 of the 4 campaigns, I found it most frequent during the Dark campaign. Not only are the actual stages so damn long that I had to look up a video to make sure I wasn't doing something wrong, but some of the bosses are also way too long for a boss battle. My worst experience being Robot Swarm. This caught me entirely off guard because when using the other teams, I had no issues. But for Dark, this took me hours. Not only is this boss battle entirely too lengthy to begin with, consisting of far too many phases and waves, but oh my god, dude. The healers and armored titans, I spent nearly 2 hours on this fight alone. Oftentimes, simply falling off the side while performing a homing attack with Shadow, or attempting to fight bot with bot by powering through them as Omega. Honestly, man, I've beaten Dark Souls games, I've beaten Neo, but completing this stage, Robot Swarm, was the most fulfilled I've felt gaming in a while. In terms of actual numbered stages, I couldn't leave out the casino stages, which were absolutely infuriating me throughout all 4 storylines. The bumpers just felt so weird to control, and there were so many glitches throughout. I simply just did not have a good time here. And once I completed these 2 terrible levels with all 4 campaigns, I was so happy to never have to do that ever again. The later stages actually felt more fair and enjoyable in comparison. The Frog Forest, Haunted Castle, and even Egg Fleet, while certainly having its tricky moments, was a ton of fun. Now, to be completely fair to this game and the fans, I'm not entirely sure if this is just me being terrible at the game. However, believe it or not, the level structure on its own isn't even the most unforgiving aspect. That spot is formerly reserved to collecting all 7 Chaos Emeralds, which is mandatory if you wish to 100% the game. And how do you collect these emeralds, you might ask? Well, by locating one of several keys within evenly numbered stages, which are the Act 2 portion of an area. Sounds simple enough, right? Yeah. To enter the emerald stage post-level completion, you'll have to locate one of the keys, and then proceed to have a flawless run throughout the remainder of your stage, meaning you can't lose any rings. This I felt was entirely too unforgiving, but since I had already gotten this far, I felt 100%ing the game was necessary for not just the video, but for my own sanity. So to ease the pain, I used 2 separate methods. Firstly, shields. These came in clutch throughout not just my emerald collection, but the entirety of the game, and felt much more useful and necessary than ever before. Secondly, utilizing Team Rose, whose playthrough is so much easier than the other 3s that it's almost a completely different game with the exact same levels. Not only are the enemies here less frequent and more avoidable, so you can still manage to hold on to your key, but the stages are so much shorter, oftentimes ending or starting off in the middle of where the Dark playthrough would. Once acquiring them, the special stages will require you to simply race to the emerald, avoiding any obstacles and collecting boosts along the way. I did find these to be extremely slippery control-wise, but once I understood the assignment, it was an absolute cinch, simply utilizing the power character who has the biggest hitbox and is the least slippery, while abusing the boost function. I mean, I legit caught the emerald in seconds with this method. Once completing all the special stages and each of the 4 teams' playthroughs, which by the way took me nearly 21 hours. Drop a like, man, please. You will finally be prompted to begin the last story, where, surprise, the big boss isn't Eggman. Didn't see that coming. It's actually Metal Sonic, a returning villain from the classic era. And at this point, with each of their initial goals resolved, sort of, all the teams finally meet up together after stopping the Egg Emperor. I almost expected them to explain different timelines or something, even though it's revealed that Metal Sonic was just masquerading as Eggman the whole time. It still, again, doesn't make much sense how all 4 of the teams were fighting Egg Emperor at the exact same time without running into each other, but I digress. Neo Metal Sonic then uses his newfound power, combined with Froggy and Chocola, to become, Metal Madness. Following this, in normal Sonic fashion, the team will stall long enough for Sonic to utilize the power of the Chaos Emeralds, thus prompting each team to take turns fighting the monster, although each will win by targeting his weak spot, aka a small circle on his side. The strategy of each team is still slightly different, with Team Rose having 2 Team Blasts rarely available, which alone will take care of the majority of the creature's HP. Chaotix will have a cannon which will allow you to shoot at Metal Sonic or simply gain 1 level up from the balloons above, while Team Dark will have all 3 level ups for all 3 characters easily obtainable, allowing you to cycle between the 3 at your convenience. But Metal Sonic will not be pulling his punches here, or rather his icicles. Also, you will still maintain the amount of lives relative to each team's playthrough. So if any of your teams were low on lives after Egg Emperor, honestly, I found this portion to be fairly challenging and tactical. I had a lot of fun here. The final boss though, Metal Overlord, was I mean, I know some people like this fight, and I had a good deal of fun here as well, but for all intents and purposes, BioWizard and Perfect Chaos were a lot more fun in my personal opinion. And having Knuckles and Tails not gain their super forms was such a waste. Both of the Sonics do look pretty cool though. Beyond this, Sonic, the one with the flesh, saves the day and everyone's mission is complete. Well, aside from Chaos getting paid, and Xiao's storyline still not being resolved, which, if you know, you know. Heroes does offer a significant amount of replayability though, allowing you to not only jump into various 2-player modes unlocked throughout your playthrough, but challenge mode, where you can replay levels and even partake in a secondary goal, like collecting 200 rings for Team Rose, or a time trial mission for Team Sonic. Aside from this, you can also check out some extras, like replaying the cutscenes, or listening to some good old OST, which, as in any Sonic game, is absolutely fire. As the Eggman's watching. That's actually a pretty good song. But anyway, this video is getting a bit longer than intended, so to wrap this up with a nice little bow, Sonic Heroes is a very innovative game. One that tried out a cool new formula, didn't quite land all of his punches, but for what it was a cool shot at something different. And while I had a much better time on my playthrough than some haters may have speculated, I can honestly say to their point that I completely understand now why I never finished this game as a kid. The gameplay is far different than what I came to expect from a Sonic game, and the game is simply just way too buggy, even for a Sonic game of this era. That being said, I can definitely understand how it can be a point of contention within the Sonic fandom, as the game can be tons of fun and a nice change from the norm, while still keeping that adventure formula intact to some degree. But although I did genuinely enjoy the challenge and the strategic nature of the game in general, all in all, it still has way too many flaws for me personally to consider it as one of my favorites in the franchise. Now, one thing's for certain, I have heard that a remake is in production. I'm not sure how true that is, but a remake being made of this game would probably completely change my opinion of it, as all this game needs is a tweak in a few different areas, and it will easily become one of my favorite Sonic games of all time. So, patience, my friends. But until then, I had a good time playing this. Obviously, if you're a Sonic fan, definitely worth picking up. If you're not, I mean, it's like a 50-50 shot. You might really enjoy it, you might not. I've seen people on both sides of the party, and you know, it's just whatever you're into, man. Honestly, I would probably rate this game, from my personal experience, like probably like a 7. I had a really fun time, but just not one of my personal favorites. But yeah, again, if you want to see more Sonic content, like, comment below what you want to see, and subscribe, of course. Thank you all so much. Appreciate your support. And as always, peace.
So there's no time to waste. Yeah, we're Sonic Heroes!